Halloween Strangers by Mr. Evil Guy. It was my turn to go trick-or-treating with my kids. The year before, it was my wife's turn, and we switch roles back and forth every year. My son and daughter are 7 and 9 years old. I usually stay on the street while my kids go to the different houses to trick-or-treat. After a half-hour walk, we arrived at one of the most popular gathering places for trick-or-treaters, a main street in the neighborhood, with lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. I got a little distracted and stopped watching my kids so closely. At one point, they came back out of the house, accompanied by another girl who was about my daughter's height. She was wearing a strange homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could go trick-or-treating with us, and I said, "Sure, I'd love to." And we went on together as a small group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I assumed she was a friend of my daughter's from school. As we continued walking, I noticed a tall man following us. He was wearing some kind of angry cat mask. To be honest, it was kind of creepy to me. I thought that maybe he was the father of the little girl, so I tried to start a little conversation with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't answer. He just stood there staring at me while our kids walked up the stairs to the next house. I tried again and asked, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but again said nothing. I figured he just wasn't in the mood to chat, so I stopped trying. We continued for about 15 minutes until suddenly my children came to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me because we hadn't been walking that long, and their bags were only a third full of candy. Anyway, I agreed, waved goodbye to the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and headed home. The weird thing was that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any kid friends like you do." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turned out, she was not a girl at all, but an older woman, around my age, with wrinkles on her face. What was even more disturbing was that the old woman started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why my children asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they just wanted to get away from her. Needless to say, I brought my kids home straight away and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy. Unfortunately, we didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened, but thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was the old woman doing? And who the hell was the man following me around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there like that on Halloween, hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. Halloween Fun by Navy Wife JP. I have more under my belt, but here's a memory from when I was younger. My dad was the coolest guy on the block, probably because he was one of the 3 black dads who lived in our town. The population is around 98% Caucasian, and that's not an exaggeration. He was a state police officer, intimidating Oakleys before the hipsters, and he was generally a rough-sounding person. Damn, do I miss him. But the one thing he feared the most was Halloween. He would tell my sister and I stories at night about his life when he was in high school in the slums in New Jersey. Every Halloween, crazy things would happen. He may have been pulling our legs a bit, but at that stage in our lives, he didn't care. When Halloween would roll around, he would take us out while Mom stayed home to trick-or-treat. One night in 5th grade, Lexi and I were dressed as a witch and a 50s poodle skirt girl. Dad held our hands, walking to the last street when I realized I'd lost Mom's scarf she'd let me borrow. She loved that old thing. so we walked all the way back towards the darker corner of our street to find it. It's by the walls in a small stream, and in the daylight you can see pretty well. But when it's dark, you can't see anything. Dad said he'd seen something and walked towards it. When he got there, he started slowing down. He was staring at something in the dark that we couldn't see. Lexi called out to him if he'd found Mom's scarf. He told her to be quiet and started crouching down, looking into the distance for several minutes. We stood there waiting. I could make out the scarf above his head tied to a branch. He grabbed the tight scarf still staring into the dark and started backing away. Then, Dad screamed and sort of shuffled backwards. It was a low, throaty scream, like he was furious. He was swearing, but I don't remember what. Whatever Dad had been staring at then bolted out of the trees and ran down the street opposite of where we lived. It was a little child, probably a boy, from his silhouette shape, and in a black costume with skeleton bones on the front and a skull mask. When Lexi and I tried to go over and see what happened, Dad yelled for us to stay back. He got onto his ancient cell phone and called Mom to come and pick us up. His next call was to the local police. Lexi and I left before we could see anything, but the next day, Mom told us about the dead-skinned animals that had been found. By the time us kids could go look, they'd taken off the place and taken out the bloody animals. But there were still the stains on the pavement and the smell was absolutely terrible. The kids talked about it in school a little, and I was curious if they'd ever caught the boy. Nothing came out in the local papers, though. Halloween Eve by Peace Sprouse. Back in 2008, I think I had graduated high school but was still living at my parents' house, along with my younger brother and sister. At the time, they were in high school and junior high, respectively. It was Halloween Eve, meaning the next day was Halloween, and we were all asleep in our beds. Now, I have to tell you that although we lived on a nicer street, our town was known for gangs, drug deals, and random crazy weirdos. It was a bit unnerving to hear gunshots and police sirens in the distance every night. But hey, it was home. Around 4:00 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot on our front porch, followed by shouting and violent pounding on our front door. Curious and frightened, I crept up to my second-floor window, which had an obstructed view of the porch. That was all I could see. Apart from hearing a stream of cursing and more pounding, I had no clue what was transpiring. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably no more than 20 minutes. Suddenly, my brother burst into my room, asking if I was okay. I replied affirmatively and asked, "What in the name of heck is going on? If you can't get that reference, you're streets ahead." He explained that some weirdo was at our front door. The man had knocked, and my dad, hearing the noise, went to see what was happening. Without opening or unlocking the door, he looked through the glass and inquired about the man's problem. The stranger kept repeating, "They're after me," while glancing nervously behind him. Seeing no one on the dimly lit street, my dad offered him our phone. The man agreed, and as my dad handed it to him through a slightly open doorway, the stranger tried to force his way in. Thankfully, my dad managed to shut and lock the door. He then called the police. That was the story up to the point when my brother came to check on me. Isn't he such a nice brother? At that moment, the man began screaming profanities, yanking at the door handle and banging on the walls. Then, the sound of shattering glass. He had thrown a chair through the front window, which led to my parents' bedroom. Panicked, I thought of the worst. Him attacking my parents and then coming for my brother and me. But just in time, the police arrived. They immediately entered our home and detained the intruder. It turned out he had climbed through the broken window, cutting himself on the glass, and crawled to my parents' bedroom, through the kitchen, and ended up on our living room floor, bleeding everywhere. He was unarmed and, contrary to my fears, hadn't fired any gunshots. We suspect he was on drugs and hallucinating that he was being chased. No charges were filed, and we never saw him again. After the police and ambulance left, my dad cleaned up the bloody mess and we all went to bed. Tragically, we all forgot about my little sister, who had been in a downstairs bedroom. No one had checked on her or told her about the incident, so she spent the night terrified under her blankets, fearing the worst. We've since all apologized to her. That's my story. Even though it was the most frightening experience of my life thus far, something good did come of it. Since the intruder bled all over our carpets, our insurance covered the cost of new ones. We not only replaced the damaged areas, but also carpeted several other rooms. So, there's that silver lining. The Most Eventful Halloween by KRC 1130. The events happened in October 2013. Obviously, since it's Halloween, I was 10 years old and in the 6th grade. Where I am from, the middle schools are separate from the elementary and high schools. As a result, my friends and I knew that we would have to start trick-or-treating immediately if we wanted to get any candy at all. Remember, Halloween of 2013 was on a Friday. This really excited us. We could hit every house we wanted and didn't have to worry about school the next day. After school, our parents picked us up and drove us to our friend Alex's house. He lived on a road named South Herald. To the left of South Herald was an identical street named South Concord. At the end of one side of South Herald was a turn that brought you to South Concord. On the other side was the main road. Alec lived closer to the main road, so our plan was to start at his house, go to the main road, then turn up and go down Concord. After that, we'd go back down Herald and return to Alex's house. So, we began trick-or-treating. There were probably 12 of us, or so I remember, but the notable ones were Alec, myself, Nate, and James. We had been accruing a great deal of candy when we got to this fateful house. It was unlike any other house, 2 stories, a garage, front lawn, etc. However, there was a Michael Myers statue in the front lawn. We went up to the house, got candy, and examined the statue closely. It was holding a hideous knife and was hunched over. James suddenly decided that it would be a good idea for us to kick it in the shin and do a little Halloween vandalism. Suddenly, the statue jumped and began holding its shin. We were frightened, realizing that the statue was actually a man. "I'm gonna kill you," said the man. Obviously, plenty of people claim they want to kill someone and not really mean it. At the time, we just assumed it was an idle threat and continued on our way. At around 8:30, it was pretty dark out. I lived up north at the time, and anyone who lives up there can agree that it gets dark pretty quickly. Anyway, we were still collecting candy when Nate and I began discussing the science behind slasher films, like who gets taken out first and why. One of the people we were with, who was in the middle of the pack, dropped his bag of candy. Suddenly, we all stopped and waited for him to pick it up. When he lifted up his head, he began to squint as if he was trying hard to see something. We all turned to see what he was looking at, and then we saw the Michael Myers costume walking behind us. It was odd. No one else was with him. In fact, we were the only group on the road. He was still holding onto the knife. When he noticed we were looking at him, he quickened his pace. Being the stupid preteens we were, we booked it. Looking over my shoulder, I realized he was starting to run too. Fortunately for my slow self, he was a decent distance behind us. Our luck turned even more in our favor when a minivan stopped at the end of Concord. It was one of our friend's mothers. We all piled into the minivan and quickly told her that someone was chasing us. She drove us all back to Alex's house. What makes this story even scarier is that Alec and Nate told me that the man was still roaming the streets after we had all left. I don't think I've really ever felt so terrified. Honestly, I have never left the house on Halloween ever since. Whether the knife this guy had was real or not is irrelevant to me. It's one of those things that I had no intention of knowing, just in case it was real and all. I suppose this story pales in comparison to some of the other experiences here, and I'm not really much of a storyteller. Still, I hope you enjoy my misfortune. TLDR. Go trick-or-treating, see a dude in the lawn. Later, the same dude chases us with a knife. Burning corpses in a car before Halloween. By Surset, as in man. This story happened the night before Halloween back in 2010. At that time, I was a freshman in college living on campus. This has significance, which will become clear later. That year, the 31st fell on a Monday, so student festivities took place on the Saturday before. During the afternoon, at around 7, I was outside playing soccer on a field near my place. I noticed an SUV driving by several times. The reason this vehicle caught my attention was that we were accidentally kicking the ball over the fence several times, and that car was present at least twice when we climbed over to retrieve the ball. I didn't think much of it at the time and proceeded to go to the party. Later that night, my girlfriend, a few friends, and I left around 9:30. We noticed a helicopter in the sky with a bright floodlight attached, seemingly scanning the area. We proceeded to the party and I didn't fret over it. The party was on the other side of the campus, so we missed all the sirens and flashing lights racing up and down the street. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me backtrack a bit. We returned from the party around 11 p.m. I immediately noticed not only the original helicopter still hovering around my campus apartment, but also a steady stream of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks driving up and down the nearby street. However, none of them had their lights or sirens on, so I wasn't really alarmed. The next day, on the internet, I discovered that an SUV had been found blazing in a parking lot with a woman's body inside. Moreover, this occurred about half to 3/4 of a mile from where I lived. I surmised that during the party, the area was teeming with police and other authorities, all searching for clues. My roommate later informed me that there were non-stop sirens for a good 20 minutes after I left for the party. In the subsequent weeks, more information came to light. A man had allegedly murdered his wife and attempted to burn the body. He had broken her neck and also bludgeoned her. If the news articles were to be believed, slight discrepancies in timing suggest that the killer was setting his wife's body on fire at the very moment I was getting dressed up in my Woody costume. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I connected the dots between the SUV described in the article and the one I'd seen while playing soccer. I realized that while I was playing, someone was driving within 20 yards of me with a corpse in their vehicle. This was particularly shocking since it occurred on the campus of a very secure university in a very safe city. Upon reading the article in more depth, it was confirmed that the teeth found did indeed belong to the victim. My hypothesis is that the murderer struck his wife so violently in the teeth that they were dislodged into her throat. Gas Station Creep on Halloween. By Tanya, first of her name. So this was 2 years ago on Halloween. I just discovered this sub about an hour ago and decided to post my own encounter. My best friend and I were leaving a club in Dallas, and we stopped at a gas station to pick up some snacks and refreshments. This guy came out and told me I looked very pretty. At this point, I was drunk and not worried about a damn thing, so I thanked him, smiled, and continued looking for munchies. He started to follow me through the aisles, though. I kind of shrugged it off. My friend and I paid at the checkout counter and were walking out when he came up behind us and asked where we were going. At this point, I was thinking, screw off, dude. We said curtly that we were going home, and he seemed to take the hint and went away. We started to walk down the street. My friend was planning on driving us home in my car since I was obviously unfit to drive. My friend wasn't 21 yet, so he hadn't been drinking. We were about 3 blocks from my car when we noticed a car driving really slow behind us. I glanced back a few times and realized it was the guy from the gas station following us. We decided that it wasn't a good idea to lead him back to my car, so we turned around and walked a different way back towards the street where the clubs were. He made an illegal U-turn and continued following us. He then rolled down his window and shouted to us, asking if we needed a ride. Politely, I said, "No, thank you, we're good. We just made a wrong turn." He continued to follow us. We sped up our pace a bit, and he sped up too. He called out to us again through the passenger window, asking again if we wanted a ride. I told him, "Please stop following us or I'd have to call the police." He then called me a derogatory name and sped off. Yeah, what a jerk. You always meet the weirdest people coming back from convenience stores, especially convenience stores on Halloween.